Jake had been working at Kepler Station's salvage yards for almost 7 years now. The job wasn't glamorous and it sure wasn't what he'd dreamed about as a kid, but it paid the bills and kept him fed. Every night, he'd clock in at 6 in the evening and work until 2 in the morning, moving between mountains of broken ships, twisted metal and technology that nobody wanted anymore. The salvage yard stretched across 3 massive hangars, each one the size of a football stadium. Rows and rows of destroyed starships sat in different states of decay, waiting to be picked apart for useful components or melted down for raw materials. His supervisor, a woman named Rita, had given him the graveyard shift assignment years ago. Back then, Jake thought it was punishment for something he'd done wrong. But over time he realized it was actually a gift. The nights were quiet. No bosses breathing down his neck. No corporate types walking around trying to make their quotas look impressive. Just Jake, his tools, and the endless wreckage of space exploration gone wrong. He'd learned to love the silence. There was something peaceful about working alone, surrounded by the ghosts of failed missions and abandoned dreams. Tonight felt like any other night. Jake had started his inventory count in Hangar 3, the section that received shipments from independent traders and private collectors. Most of the stuff that came through there was junk. Broken life support systems, corroded solar panels, damaged cargo containers. Nothing worth getting excited about. But around midnight, as he was scanning a particularly large shipment that had arrived that morning, something made him stop and look twice. There was a pod. Not like the standard cargo containers he usually saw, but something different. It was roughly the size of a coffin, made of reinforced steel with this strange crystalline viewport on top. It sat buried under a stack of busted mining equipment, almost like someone had tried to hide it. Jake felt something stir in his chest. Curiosity maybe. Or something deeper. He started moving the mining equipment away, piece by piece, until he finally had clear access to the strange pod. The viewport was foggy, but Jake could see something moving inside. Something alive. His heart started beating faster. He wiped away some of the grime covering the viewport and looked inside, and what he saw made him forget to breathe for a moment. It was a creature. Massive. Its fur was dark as the space between stars, and it had these eyes, golden and intelligent and completely, utterly aware. The thing had a body built for violence. Muscles rippled under that midnight-colored fur like hydraulic cables ready to snap. Its paws were the size of dinner plates, and Jake could see the tips of curved claws that looked like they could tear through steel. The face was feline, almost like a tiger, but wrong somehow. More intelligent. More dangerous. More aware. But what really got Jake's attention was what covered the creature's head. There were devices wrapped around its skull like some kind of complex harness. Neural suppressors. Jake recognized them immediately from his training years ago. They were used to dampen aggressive instincts in dangerous animals. To make them docile. Controllable. This wasn't just any creature. This was something important. Something powerful that someone had specifically wanted to keep locked down and quiet. Jake's mind raced. He'd heard stories about the Valder species. They were legendary in the outer sectors. Apex predators from a distant system that had evolved into something more than just animals. They had culture. They had language. They had honor codes that made human warriors look soft. Finding one here, drugged into compliance and hidden away in the salvage yards, meant something was very wrong. Jake looked around the hangar. Nobody was watching him. Security cameras in the salvage yards weren't great. They broke down constantly and the maintenance team was always behind on repairs. He had maybe 10 minutes of unwatched time before his next scheduled checkpoint. The smart thing to do would be to walk away. Report it to Rita. Let the management handle it. Let it become someone else's problem. But Jake had never been very good at doing the smart thing. He looked back at the creature in the pod. Those golden eyes were watching him. Really watching him. Not with the blank stare of an animal, but with the focused attention of something intelligent. Something that was desperate. Something that had been trapped for so long that the very idea of freedom probably seemed like a distant dream. Jake made a decision right there, standing in the empty hangar at midnight, with nothing but the hum of the life support systems and the distant echo of his own breathing. He couldn't leave this creature here. Not like this. Whatever the consequences might be, whatever trouble it might bring him, Jake knew he couldn't just walk away and pretend he hadn't seen this. He reached down and touched the cold metal of the pod. The creature inside pressed its massive head against the viewport, as if trying to reach back to him. That simple gesture sealed it. Jake was going to free this thing no matter what it took. He just had no idea what he was really starting. Jake didn't sleep for 3 days. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those golden eyes staring back at him from inside the pod. He kept thinking about what he'd seen, what he'd decided to do, and how completely insane the whole thing actually was. But there was no backing out now. He'd made a choice, and every fiber of his being told him it was the right one, even if it was probably the stupidest decision he'd ever make in his life. The pod's control panel was sealed with a security lock that would have taken most people months to bypass. Jake figured he had maybe 2 weeks before someone from upper management decided to actually check on what was stored in Hangar 3. 2 weeks to figure out how to deactivate the neural suppressors without triggering any alarms. 2 weeks to free something that could probably kill him with a single swipe of its paw. He started small. During his shifts, Jake would spend an hour or two studying the pod's exterior, memorizing the layout of the circuits and the power conduits. He'd worked with damage tech his entire career, and over the years he picked up enough knowledge to understand the basics of most systems. The suppressors were old military-grade equipment, probably stolen or salvaged from somewhere. The good news was that old equipment was predictable. The bad news was that disabling them without triggering the failsafe would require precision and patience that Jake wasn't entirely sure he possessed. On the 4th night, Jake finally made his move. He'd smuggled some tools down from the maintenance locker. Nothing obvious, nothing that would raise red flags if anyone checked the inventory. Just basic equipment that any salvage worker might need. He approached the pod like he was defusing a bomb because in a way he was. One wrong move, and either the suppressors would activate a distress beacon, or the creature inside would wake up angry and confused and very, very dangerous. The first suppressor band took him 40 minutes to disconnect. His hands shook the entire time. Sweat dripped down his face and he kept stopping to listen for footsteps or the sound of someone entering the hangar. But the night remained quiet. The creature inside the pod never moved, never made a sound. Jake wondered if it was even alive anymore, if maybe the suppressors had damaged something vital and he was wasting his time trying to save something already dead. He completed the second suppressor band 3 nights later. This one was more complex than the first with more redundant safety features. But Jake was learning as he went. Each band he disconnected taught him something new about how the system worked. He was starting to understand the logic behind the design, the way the circuits were meant to communicate with each other. It was almost beautiful in a terrible way, like watching the inner workings of a trap designed to hold something dangerous. Week 2 arrived and Jake had managed to remove 4 of the 6 suppressor bands. His manager Rita had asked him twice why he was spending so much time in Hangar 3. Both times, Jake had made up some excuse about inventory discrepancies or damaged equipment that needed his attention. Rita hadn't pressed him. She was too busy dealing with corporate stuff to worry about what he was doing down in the salvage yards. The 5th suppressor band came loose on a Thursday night. Jake's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might explode. He was getting close now. Just one more band to go, and then this creature would be truly awake for the first time in who knows how long. Jake wondered what would happen then. Would it remember being free? Would it remember being captured? Would it blame him for keeping it in the pod for another 3 weeks while he worked on the suppressors? That last band was the hardest. It was the main power coupling, the one that kept all the others synchronized. Jake had to disconnect it in a very specific sequence, or the whole system would lock down permanently. His hands were steady now though. 3 weeks of this work had given him confidence. He'd done the impossible already. One more step wouldn't break him. The final suppressor band fell away on a Friday night. Jake stepped back from the pod and waited. Nothing happened. No alarms. No failsafes. No emergency protocols kicked in. The pod just sat there humming quietly like it always did. But something had changed. Jake could feel it. The creature inside was still dormant, still locked in whatever chemically induced sleep they'd put it in, but the chains were gone. The neural suppressors that had bound its mind were finally deactivated. Jake took a deep breath and reached for the pod's manual release. This was the real moment. This was the point of no return. Once he opened that pod, everything would change. The creature would wake up. It would be confused and angry and afraid. And Jake would be standing right there when it happened, completely defenseless. He pulled the release lever. The pod hissed as the seal broke, and a cloud of preservative gas escaped into the hangar. Jake stepped back, every muscle in his body tense and ready to run. The viewport slid open with a mechanical grind. And then, slowly, those golden eyes blinked. The creature was waking up. Jake and Kex had been running for 5 days straight. The cargo hauler they'd stolen from Kepler Station was old and barely functional, but it was fast enough to stay ahead of the security drones that had chased them into the void. The ship rattled and groaned with every jump, its engine screaming in protest as Jake pushed it harder than it was ever meant to go. Behind them, the station had sent out distress signals. Somewhere out there, people were looking for them. People who wanted Jake in custody and Kexthar back in a pod. The first 3 days had been the worst. Kexthar had been confused and angry when he woke up, his mind still foggy from the chemical suppressants that had kept him docile for so long. He tried to attack Jake twice, his massive claws raking through the cargo bay air just inches from Jake's face. But there was something different about the Valder now that he was truly awake. His eyes were clearer, his movements more controlled. And gradually, over hours of tense standoff, Kexthar had started to understand that Jake wasn't his enemy. They talked, if you could call it that. Kexthar's voice was rough and broken from years of disuse, but his English was clear enough. He told Jake about being captured during a Valder colony raid. About the Collectors, some kind of syndicate that hunted alien species and sold them to the highest bidder for experimentation. About years of pain and violation and the slow crushing of hope. He told Jake that he was supposed to be dead by now, that most Valder prisoners didn't survive more than a few months in captivity. Kexthar had survived 4 years. Now they were floating through an asteroid field, the cargo hauler's life support system struggling to keep up, and Jake was running on fumes and pure adrenaline. The fuel was almost gone. The communication system was fried. They had maybe 48 hours of breathable air left if he didn't push the engines any harder. And Jake knew that Kepler Station had probably already alerted every security force within 1,000 light-years about the escaped criminal and the stolen predator. "We're not going to make it," Kexthar said from the pilot's seat beside him. The Valder's massive frame barely fit in the cramped cockpit. "The Collectors will find us before we reach any populated sector." Jake didn't respond. He was too focused on the navigation console, trying to plot a course to anywhere that might offer them shelter. But Kexthar was right. Their chances were getting worse by the hour. Jake had been a salvage yard worker, not a pilot. He'd stolen this ship on pure instinct and desperation. He had no real plan beyond running away from the people trying to kill them. Then the sensor started screaming. Jake's head snapped up and his stomach dropped. On the display screen, massive energy signatures were appearing all around them. Multiple ships. No, not ships. Warships. Ancient and enormous, their hulls bearing scars from countless battles. The cargo hauler's primitive sensors were having trouble even identifying what they were looking at. "What is that?" Jake whispered. Kexthar's entire body went rigid. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Those are Valder vessels. War Guardians. I didn't think I would ever see them again." Before Jake could ask what that meant, the communication system crackled to life. A voice came through, deep and authoritative and absolutely terrifying. It spoke in the Valder language, but somehow Jake understood it. Kexthar had explained that Valder warriors could broadcast in most known languages through some kind of neural frequency. The message was simple and direct. "Stand down. Power down your engines. You are surrounded." Jake's hands froze on the controls. This was it. This was the moment they got caught. He'd freed Kexthar only to lead him straight into the arms of military forces that probably wanted him captured or dead. Jake had failed. But then one of the massive Valder ships moved, positioning itself between them and the asteroid field. The message came through again, but this time it was different. Different enough that Jake realized the first message hadn't been directed at him. It had been directed at something else. Something that had been hunting them. "This is Commander Vex Thorn of the 3rd War Guardian Fleet," the voice said. "Stand down, slavers. This warrior is under Valder protection now." Kexthar made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "The War Guardians came. I don't understand. How did they know?" Through the viewport, Jake could see smaller vessels appearing around them. Valder fighters, sleek and deadly. But they weren't attacking. They were moving into formation around the cargo hauler, creating a protective barrier. And then, slowly and deliberately, one of the massive warships began transmitting a docking signal. The cargo hauler's door chimed. A communication request was coming through. Jake looked at Kexthar, then back at the console. His hand moved almost on its own, accepting the transmission. The face that appeared on the screen was scarred and ancient and utterly commanding. The War Guardian commander looked at Jake with an expression that was impossible to read. Then, slowly, that scarred face tilted slightly in what might have been a nod of acknowledgement. "Human," the commander said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "You freed our prince from slavery. That is a debt we do not forget. Come aboard. We have much to discuss." The first thing Jake noticed when he stepped onto the Valder warship was the smell. It was metallic and ancient, like walking into a place that had been sealed away from the universe for thousands of years. The second thing he noticed was that every single Valder warrior on the docking platform was staring at him like he was some kind of alien creature that had just landed from another dimension. which Jake supposed he was to them. Commander Vexthorn stood at the center of the platform, his massive frame casting a shadow across the entire hangar. The scars covering his face told the story of a being who had spent centuries in combat. His left eye was cybernetic, glowing faintly with an amber light. When he looked at Jake, it was with the intensity of someone studying a puzzle they weren't sure they could solve. "Welcome aboard the Valerian," the commander said, his voice echoing through the hangar. "I am Vexthorn. I have commanded the 3rd War Guardian fleet for 237 years. In all that time, I have never encountered a situation quite like this one." Jake tried to stand tall, but he felt impossibly small. "I just did what was right," he said. "Your prince was being held prisoner. I freed him. That's all." The commander's scarred face twisted into something that might have been a smile. "Among my people, such an act would require a warrior's courage and a lifetime of training. You performed it with nothing but determination and a human's strange capacity for compassion. It is intriguing." For 3 days Jake lived aboard the Valerian. The Valder treated him with a mixture of curiosity and respect that he didn't quite understand. They gave him quarters. They fed him food that was surprisingly edible. Kexthar spent time with him, introducing him to some of the other Valder warriors, explaining their culture and their history. Jake learned that the Valder had been fighting the Collectors for generations, trying to stop the trafficking of enslaved species. The fact that Kexthar was royalty meant this had become personal for the entire civilization. On the 4th day the sensors detected something on the horizon. Multiple ships. Dozens of them. The Collectors had found them. Commander Vexthorn called an all-hands meeting. Jake wasn't invited, but Kexthar dragged him along anyway, insisting that the human who had freed him should witness what came next. The bridge of the Valerian was massive, filled with holographic displays and ancient technology that made Jake's head spin. The commander stood before his assembled fleet, his cybernetic eye glowing brighter as he assessed the approaching enemy vessels. "The Collectors bring fire," Vexthorn announced. "They believe they can take back what was stolen from them. They are wrong. We will show them the price of enslaving our people." The battle began at dawn, if you could call it dawn when there was no sun in sight. The Valder warships moved with devastating precision, their weapon systems cutting through the Collector vessels like knives through paper. It should have been a slaughter. It should have been over in minutes. But the Collectors had brought something unexpected. One of their massive command ships emerged from behind an asteroid field, and it was armed with technology that made even the ancient Valder weapons seem primitive. The first volley took out 2 of the Guardian ships instantly. Jake watched from the bridge as warriors he'd been eating with just hours before turned into nothing but scattered atoms and debris. That's when Commander Vexthorn did something that changed everything. He looked directly at Jake and said, "You understand human engineering. You think like a salvage worker. Can you help us?" Jake's mind raced. He didn't have military training. He didn't know Valder technology. But he understood systems. He understood how things worked when they broke down. And right now the Valder were breaking down. "Show me your power distribution system," Jake said. The next 2 hours were a blur of action and adrenaline. Jake moved through the Valorian's engine rooms with a group of Valder engineers, pointing out inefficiencies that had probably existed for centuries. He showed them how to reroute power to maximize their shield strength. He identified vulnerabilities in their reactor design and suggested workarounds that nobody had thought of before. When a Collector boarding party breached the lower decks, Jake was there, using nothing but a wrench and his knowledge of the ship's layout to sabotage their equipment and turn their own weapons systems against them. He fought alongside creatures that could tear him apart with barely any effort. He ran through corridors filled with weapons fire. He did things that his salvage yard self would never have believed possible. And somehow, impossibly, he survived. When the battle finally ended, the Collectors were in full retreat, their command ship crippled and helpless. The Valder had won, but it had cost them dearly. Vexthorn stood on the bridge, his scarred face covered in new wounds, and looked at Jake with something different in his ancient eyes. "You fought with the courage of a warrior," the commander said. "You thought like a general. You survived like a survivor. Among my people, this earns you a place of honor." 6 months had passed since that battle in the asteroid field, and Jake still couldn't quite believe it was real. He stood in the observation dome of Valder Station, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Behind him, the Great Hall was being prepared for the most important assembly the galaxy had seen in over a century. Representatives from Earth were arriving. Politicians from the outer colonies. Officials from species that had been hiding from the Collectors for generations. And somehow Jake was supposed to be the one to bring them all together. The truth was, Jake didn't feel like a hero. He still felt like the same person who'd worked the night shift in a salvage yard, moving between broken ships and discarded technology. But everything had changed. His hands were cleaner now, but they carried the weight of things he'd done during that battle. He'd sabotaged collector weapons systems. He'd helped Valder engineers reroute power in ways that had saved hundreds of lives. He'd looked into the eyes of beings he'd fought against and understood in that moment that the galaxy was far more complicated than he'd ever imagined. Commander Vexthorn found him standing alone in the observation dome. The old Valder warrior moved with a grace that belied his centuries of existence. His scars had healed slightly since the battle, but new ones had been added to his collection. He was a living map of every conflict he'd ever survived. "You're nervous?" Vexthorn observed. It wasn't a question. "I'm terrified," Jake admitted. "I'm a salvage yard worker. I don't know how to talk to presidents and prime ministers. I don't know about diplomacy or politics. I just know how to fix things." The commander's scarred face twisted into what might have been a smile. "Exactly. That is why you are perfect for this. The galaxy does not need another politician. It needs someone who understands that broken things can be repaired. That systems that have failed for generations can be rebuilt. That even the most damaged civilization can be restored if someone cares enough to try." Vexthorn placed a massive paw on Jake's shoulder, a gesture of reassurance that had become familiar over the past months. "You freed my prince from slavery. You fought beside my warriors. You saved countless lives through your knowledge and your courage. Do you understand what that means? It means you are no longer just a human. You are a war brother of House Valder. Your words carry weight now." The great hall was breathtaking. Massive crystalline walls soared hundreds of feet high, and the ceiling was open to the stars themselves. Rows of seats had been arranged in a perfect circle, with Jake's platform positioned at the center. It was designed so that every representative, no matter what species they belonged to, could see and be seen by everyone else. There would be no hierarchy here. No one sitting above anyone else. Jake watched as the delegates filed in. He recognized some of them from historical records he'd studied obsessively over the past week. Ambassador Chin from the Earth Coalition. Governor Rodriguez from the Mars Colonial Assembly. Representatives from the Syrian Collective, the Andromedan Trade Federation, and a dozen other civilizations. But he also saw beings he'd never encountered before. Creatures made of what looked like living crystal. Beings who communicated through light patterns instead of words. Entities that seemed to exist in more dimensions than Jake's human brain could properly comprehend. Kexthar sat in the front row, directly across from Jake's platform. The Valder prince had chosen to remain in his royal position rather than stand beside Jake, a deliberate choice to show that Jake's authority came from his own merit, not from proximity to power. It was a subtle diplomatic move, and Jake felt a surge of gratitude for his friend's understanding. Commander Vexthorn opened the assembly with a formal announcement, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of military command. He spoke of the collectors. Of the generations of species that had been hunted and enslaved. Of the cycles of violence that had plagued the galaxy for so long that many civilizations had accepted it as simply the natural way of things. Then he introduced Jake. Jake walked to the center of the great hall, and for a moment he felt utterly alone. Thousands of eyes were on him. Eyes of different shapes and colors and levels of consciousness. Eyes that had seen wars and treaties and the rise and fall of civilizations. And then he opened his mouth and spoke. "My name is Jake," he began, and his voice echoed through the crystalline chamber. "I'm not a politician. I'm not a general. I'm not even supposed to be here. 6 months ago I was working at a salvage yard on Kepler Station, moving broken equipment and barely thinking about anything beyond my next paycheck. Then I found someone in chains." He paused, letting that sink in. That person was Kexthar, a Valder warrior and a prince of his people. He'd been captured by the collectors. He'd been enslaved and experimented on and stripped of his freedom. And when I found him, I had a choice to make. I could walk away. I could pretend I hadn't seen him. I could tell myself it wasn't my problem. Jake's voice grew stronger. But I couldn't do that. Because when you see someone suffering, when you see someone in chains, you can't just ignore it. You can't just move on with your life like nothing happened. Not if you want to be able to look yourself in the mirror. The great hall was absolutely silent now. Even the beings made of crystal and light seemed to pause in their communication. The collectors believe that power comes from controlling others. From enslaving those who are weaker. From building empires on suffering. But they're wrong. Real power comes from standing together. Real strength comes from looking at someone different from you, someone from another species, another world, another reality, and saying, I see your pain. I want to help. That's what Kexthar taught me. That's what the Valder War Guardians have taught me. Jake looked around the hall, making eye contact with representatives from every civilization present. We can continue the way things have always been. We can hide from the collectors. We can protect our own worlds and let others suffer. Or we can do something different. We can build an alliance. Not based on military might or economic power, but based on a simple idea, that all sentient beings deserve freedom. That slavery is wrong. That compassion is strength. He raised his hand and Vexthorn walked forward. The commander placed an ancient ceremonial blade at Jake's feet, the same gesture he'd made after the battle. It was a symbol of deep respect and trust among the Valder. This blade has been carried by Valder warriors for 3,000 years, Vexthorn announced. It has never been given to a non-Valder being. Today, it rests in this human's hands as a symbol that the boundaries between our peoples have been broken, that we stand together now. And we invite every civilization in this hall to stand with us. One by one the representatives stood. Some slowly, some quickly. Some with obvious hesitation, others with clear determination. By the time they were all on their feet, the great hall was filled with beings of every imaginable type, all united in a single moment of commitment. Jake looked down at the ceremonial blade in his hands, and he thought about that night in the salvage yard. About a moment of simple human kindness that had rippled outward and changed the course of history. He wasn't a hero. He was just a person who couldn't ignore someone in need. But maybe Jake realized that was what heroes actually were. People who saw a problem and decided to do something about it regardless of the cost to themselves. The stars shone overhead through the open ceiling of the Great Hall, witness to humanity's first step into a larger galaxy. And standing at the center of it all was Jake, a salvage yard mechanic who had freed a prince and, in doing so, had freed so much more. The future was uncertain. The collectors would fight back. There would be more battles, more sacrifices, more pain. But for the first time in generations the galaxy had hope. And it had all started because one human being had looked at another creature in chains and couldn't walk away.